Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, very special guest, returning guest. His name is Terry Wolfe, Wolfe. And if you've listened to my show, you've heard him in the past. This will be our eighth episode. Our seventh episode, we covered what I think is really one of the most evil movies I've ever seen. I cannot even believe it. It was Disclosure Day by Spielberg as Luciferian Initiation. It was so dark. Like, I know all the symbols and everything like that. So for me, like, nothing was coded. Like, nothing was really that occulted. So it was really dark. That was fairly recently. I think we did that one just in June, and today is August. And in the interim, I got notified. He told me he was writing a book back in June. And then I saw it pop up on Amazon, so I reached out to him. And if you're watching this on any of my channels, which I still have, it's been about a year since I've had my YouTube channels back, but also on X Rumble and now Substack. I'm streaming to Substack. You'll see the full title of the book is Riding the Beast, Israel and America's Partnership in Prophecy. And we were also talking the pre-show that I linked up with Terry through my friend Hervoye Morich of Geopolitics and Empire, and I was listening to their show about the book today. So I was kind of trying to ramp up and come up to speed about the themes of the book. But like I said, this is our eighth episode. Some of the other episodes Terry's going to bring into this discussion, but I think I've covered all of his books: Rise of the Beast, Four Kingdoms Explained, Paradox of Fundamentalism, Fire in the Rabbit Hole, and Maybe Everyone is Wrong. So we've covered a lot of that stuff. But this book is really, the formatting is really good. Like, it looks very professionally done. And I read through it, and it's very timely. Like, I think I was listening to the show with Hervoye, and they're like, wow, this is wild, like, stuff that's happening. Because I think at the gestation of the book, there wasn't this tying together of Israel and the U.S., which is happening, which is really the U.S. will no longer be a sovereign country, in my opinion. Anyway, Terry can talk a lot more about that, some of the background episodes, and what led up to Writing the Beast. So, Terry Wolfe, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, William. Yeah, I'm doing promotion for the book now, but I would want to talk about this if I didn't have a book because it's so timely. So the backstory is that in 2019, 2018, I started to do the research to write my first flagship prophetic interpretation study of Revelation called Maybe Everyone is Wrong, Revelation's Conspiracy in the Kingdom of Heaven. I published it in 2020 during the lockdowns. And so all of this stuff that I'm talking about in Riding the Beast kind of was in that book already in a sketch form, just as I was trying to solve the puzzle of Revelation. And like, that's what I'm sort of passionate about, is trying to understand and appreciate the prophecies of the Bible. And so what I had before was like a solution to the puzzle. Everything I figured out there, it clicked, it made sense. But at 2020, no one was talking about Israel. Everyone was obviously just talking about COVID and pandemics and lockdowns and a new world order and all this stuff. But in that, you can go back and see, I talked about exactly this idea that Israel and America are going to have to merge because their partnership is going to have to reach the point where it resembles what is described in Revelation 17, 18, 19, this whore, this prostitute riding the beast. And so I had the solution to this puzzle, but it didn't feel relevant. And since then, the world has gone into overdrive, especially since October 7th, obviously, where you have this genocide that the whole world is watching. Everyone is just sort of standing by. There's the United Nations and people condemning Israel for it. Most of America hates Israel at this point and doesn't want America to be tied to the hip to them and doing their bidding. And it just doesn't matter. And people can't understand, they think this is what's so interesting about it when I did this book, because I didn't understand why like I had the answer, but not the reason. And so now this book is to look for the reason why America and Israel partner, what they both get out of it in real terms today in terms of their strategic partnership, because a lot of it doesn't make sense. Israel doesn't need America, and America doesn't need Israel. Israel could very easily partner up with Russia or China, but they have this dysfunctional, hate-filled relationship with each other. And so when I got into the psychology of, I did the research, the book, I have a copy here. You have it on screen. I appreciate that. So it's about 240 pages. The first part, it's divided into 3 parts. The first part is all about Israel's side of things, sort of the backstory of Zionism and the idea that Israel is owed that land and that God promised the land to them and that they have eternal claim to it. I debunk that completely using scripture. I show that that's actually completely backwards, that Israel was told specifically that they are not entitled to that land, that it is God's land and God alone owns that land, and they were allowed to live on it conditionally only if they obeyed his laws, and that if they broke his laws and they broke his commandments, he would be the one personally to make sure that they are evicted and they are scattered and that they don't get to live there anymore. And with the promise that eventually he'll bring them back, and once they are righteous, he will give them the land and they'll be allowed to live there. And so this sets up the paradox of, well, then why are they living there? Because obviously they don't believe in Jesus. Obviously they don't even have a temple, so they can't be doing the sacrifices. They don't have a high priest. The priesthood itself is completely lost. Everything about it screams impossible. This can't be a miracle of God that he brought them back and restored them. And so this is where you get sort of what I consider to be a satanic inversion of Zionism, a satanic inversion of the real promises that God gave to restore them, to give them power, and to make them righteous and make the whole world sort of look to them for answers, which is what Old Testament prophets say is eventually going to happen there. So part 1 of the book is looking at that mystery and how God cursed them. A lot of like Ted Cruz and these guys will say, if you bless Israel, you will be blessed. If you curse Israel, you will be cursed. And that language is in the Bible, but they ignore the fact that God is the one who said he will curse Israel more than anyone if they don't obey him. And I show how the Babylonian exile, followed by the Persian occupation, the Greek occupation, and the Roman occupation of Israel and the whole Mediterranean, sort of disproves this idea that they were properly restored after they were allowed to come back out of exile and set up. They built a second temple, and then they thought they were restored. They thought the curse was over. They were allowed to worship and practice their religion. Gets into the 400 years of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament that churches really don't know what to do with. It's a very awkward subject for churches. The fact that for 400 years, God didn't talk to Israel. And then you have John the Baptist and Jesus. And suddenly they're like, what? There's a prophet again? And is this the Messiah? And then the Messiah doesn't do any of the things they want him to do, like destroy the Roman Empire and become this great king that conquers the world and all this stuff. And so churches just sort of, they simultaneously have to acknowledge that Israel was still disobedient, but they were allowed to come back to the land. And so there's this awkwardness that churches don't want to deal with. That's kind of part 1. It builds up the logic right from the verses from the Old Testament that God puts his name in Jerusalem, especially as a unique city. and it says he's going to put his name there forever. He doesn't say that about any other city. So Jerusalem specifically is this obvious prophetic nexus point where it's going to come to a climax sooner or later, that he owns that city, but it's always being disputed and Satan is always trying to capture it. And it gets into what I call, and this is something I didn't appreciate back in when I wrote Maybe Everyone Is Wrong, is the love triangle, I call it, between Satan, God, and Israel. That if you think of it in terms of sort of like a cheesy plot from a romance movie or something, it's like there's this woman that is, both men are trying to have her heart, right? And she doesn't know which one to pick. That's essentially what the story of Jerusalem is with God and Satan, that they are properly married to God. I go into the prophet Hosea, who was required by God to marry a prostitute, and she went out and got pregnant from other men, and he had to raise those kids in his home as a lesson for Israel, to say Israel is like a prostitute that goes out and has kids with other men, and then God is expected to raise them and take care of them, even though he feels nothing for them, and he knows that his wife is a whore and is cheating on him. That's literally what the prophet Hosea says. And then Isaiah and other prophets, Jeremiah, all those prophets, they also compare Jerusalem to being a prostitute. And so this isn't some leap of logic in the book of Revelation when you see this prostitute that is dressed in purple and has all this jewelry and seems like she's trying to be a queen, but she's actually just an imposter pretending to be a queen that is a prostitute who's gotten rich from all of this debauchery and sin. And so the first part of the book explores all of that. The second part is all about the beast and how Rome is this beast empire. And we've talked about this on previous episodes because it's a theme of my books, but how Rome is this empire that never dies. It's always going away and it's always returning. It has this sort of immortality that it just changes its stripes. And so you have, Daniel talks about the four kingdoms in multiple prophecies. It talks about Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And of course, it doesn't mention Rome by name because they weren't even an empire when that was written. But this fourth kingdom is obviously Rome, and it says that it's going to last all the way until, this Ancient of Days, the Son of Man comes and rips it away and burns it, and then there will be this eternal peace, and God will establish his kingdom on earth and all this stuff. So that's obviously talking about Rome, and it's obviously talking about Jesus. But it's not fulfilled yet because there's all these promises where once he does that, there's going to be no more war in the world. The 12 tribes of Israel will be reunited. It won't just be the tribe of Judah, known obviously as the Jews. We don't even know about these other 12 tribes of Israel, but according to God's prophecy, they all need to be reunited. They need to have a temple and a high priest, and they need to have all these things that they still don't have today. And so we know this prophecy hasn't been fulfilled, that essentially that fourth kingdom of Rome is still in power. And so it's called a beast there in the Old Testament. Then the New Testament comes by with Revelation, and you see this beast that is described with 7 heads and 10 horns, which matches the description in Daniel. It's a parallel. So it's like, okay, here's that beast again. It's not supposed to be shocking that it's the same beast. There is Rome. It matches the description. And then it goes through these iterations. The second beast having 2 horns like a lamb and a mouth like a dragon. I explained that all in Maybe Everyone Is Wrong as well, but just to remind people, if probably people haven't heard about it, the horns being like a lamb, the lamb is obviously a symbol of Christ because he's the lamb. The dragon is a symbol for Satan. It says that very clearly, the dragon is Satan. And so it has this internal contradiction where it is outwardly looking like a Christian thing, but it is secretly the way it speaks and its teachings are satanic. And that is the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, which is also a Roman church. Both of them stem from Constantine, Emperor Constantine, who legalized Christianity, but also tried to capture it at the same time to make it part of the empire. And this creates that false concept of Christendom, which is this idea that that Christianity has this sort of moral obligation to conquer the entire world in the name of Christ and impose Christianity on every nation, forcibly convert them, kill all the people who don't agree with Christianity, and just completely betray the principles that Jesus taught about, calling up to sinners for individual repentance and being separate from the world and not seeking power and all these things. So all these critics of Christianity are completely right to point out that the Catholic Church and this Christendom idea was totally false. But what they don't realize is that was predicted in Revelation, that the false church was there. Jesus said there would be tares sown among the wheat. There would be a false church, and that many would be deceived by it, that there would always just be a minority of people who understood the truth. And so I get into that. That's fleshed out in more detail here, but especially when we get to the third iteration of the beast, which is the image of the beast. And I know we've talked about this in another episode because that's exactly what my little pamphlet book was about, called Rise of the Beast. And I wanted to sort of give a pocket-sized sort of summary of the evidence, but here I get into it more fully. So if people are interested in that, it's definitely worth looking into, because you find all the founding fathers of America were obsessed with Rome. They wanted to have a Roman republic. That's why America is a republic, is that they wanted to reproduce what Rome had, have senators and never have a king, and have the official motto, or the way that Rome referred to itself, its own form of government, was abbreviated as SPQR, which was the Senate and the people. That was in Latin how it abbreviated. And so people like Joe Rogan I've seen say that, America was the first democracy ever. It was the first republic. He doesn't even realize that he thought that everything before America had a king. No, that was the whole genius of Rome, is that they didn't have a king. They had a Senate, and they forbid there forever being a king. They said death to tyrants, death to kings. Anybody who tried to become a king, they would kill. That's why Julius Caesar was killed. And so America is this very serious attempt to create a reproduction of Rome as it originally was. And what they didn't realize, and also what most churches don't realize, and people who even study Revelation don't realize, is that that's also a fulfillment of prophecy. That this image of the beast, when you look at it in Revelation 13, it talks about how it is a replica of the first beast. So you have Rome, then you have the Catholic Church, and then you have this replica of the first beast being created much later. So I get into that, and ultimately this leads to the question of Zionism and this idea that this beast, this image of the beast, is going to work together with this bizarre inverted Zionist logic to force, this is really the British project of Zionism, with their idea of creating Palestine, or creating Israel and Palestine, forcing Jews to move there. I don't get into the Holocaust or the Rothschilds or the City of London banking families or Epstein or the blackmail operations in this book, because I feel like it's not only it's very well covered now. A couple of years ago it wasn't, but now people are quite familiar with that. But I also feel like I don't need to. I could make the case without all of that. And so I explain how Zionism came to be in the modern time. I show the parallels to the first century with the Jews and the Romans sort of cooperating to kill Jesus and to suppress that, how they make sort of this match made in hell together, and why it makes sense narratively for God to set this up in his own prophecies, that his wife, so to speak, becomes more and more engaged with this satanic empire that oppresses Christians. And yeah, the third part of the book is about what happens when they combine, what the unity of them means. So it's a history of America and Israel's partnership so far, and where I think it's going to go from there.
Right. I mean, it's a long story. So it all builds up to something today where, like, it's like they talk about Pax Americana. It used to be Pax Romana, but it's really kind of an inversion because the U.S., and since its power, is not peaceful at all. And then, like, I think you mentioned with her boy, Pax Judaica. And even the word Zionism is really loaded because the state of Israel, since its founding, has really been like the United States, constantly a war, expansive war, like constantly moving around. So I don't know how peaceful it is there, at least according to my approximation. I mean, it's something else, but it ties into kind of something. And I had this video and some of the themes that are in this book I have, but I just want to show this one clip of Netanyahu because it's a theological statement. This is what is ostensibly the king of the Jews, the prime minister of Israel, right? It's international too. Judaism is like Christianity or Roman Church. It's international, right? The Roman Church is on many waters. All leads back to the Vatican. Well, Israel is the center of, I mean, they keep repeating it all the time. It's a Jewish state. But I just want to play this because for me, this was quite a tell from Netanyahu.
That, unfortunately and unhappily, Jesus Christ has no advantage over Genghis Khan. Because if you are strong enough, ruthless enough, powerful enough, evil will overcome good. Aggression will overcome moderation. So you have no choice. If you look at the world as it is today, you have to be blind not to see that the democracies led by the United States have to reassert their will to defend themselves and to oppose their enemies in time while there's still time, before the jarring gong of danger wakes them up and wakes them up too late. This is where we are now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an incredible statement. Just there's
I've never
so much
seen that clip.
Yeah, the will. You have to have the will. You have to defend. You have to strong. You have to do it now. The democracies.
Jesus Christ doesn't give you an advantage. That's an amazing clip, actually, because that is exactly the thesis that I come toward in the book, which is trying to explain what I call the meta psychology of Israel and America. Like, what explains their partnership? What is it that they like about each other? Because so many presidents, you can go back right to Truman and stuff. They hated Israel. Like, it's not, people make it sound like the White House is captured. Right now, it's very fashionable to, believe the most extreme conspiracy theories about Israel, that they, they control every single aspect of the world, that, basically nobody can resist their will. And that's a very silly, childish way of looking at things. And if you actually look at the record, which I had to do for this book, you find that all of these presidents were very begrudging. They didn't like Israel. They felt under various circumstances they had to. Of course, there's massive pressure from lobbying groups. But really what it comes down to, and this is something that I don't know if I've heard other people explain, but this clip that you showed nicely captures it, is that because America is not a Christian nation, it is a militaristic empire that is LARPing as a Christian nation and recruiting Christians constantly into its mechanisms. It is founded with this Christian rhetoric. Maybe a bunch of the founding fathers even were sincere Christians and they wished that the country would be Christian. I would even grant that. But it was hopeless. It was never going to be that for long. So it very quickly became, not only do you have slavery right off the bat, but you have all these internal contradictions, and then it gets hijacked. And especially during World War II, you have this transformation into this empire that drops nuclear bombs on civilian populations. And so this burden of Christianity is like this leash that is on the neck of the beast. It's struggling to get away from Christianity, and it doesn't know how. And essentially what Israel is offering is a way out of Christianity, a way to, because you see, especially with Trump, you see this transformation of audacity, of unapologetic criminality. It's the Israeli model projected onto the American system. Netanyahu embodies it in Israel. And much like in America, like the majority of Jews in Israel hate Netanyahu. There was massive protests for every single week leading up to October 7th, when this 9/11 like disaster happens that is supposed to shut down all protests and unite the country and mobilize them against the common enemy and all that stuff. I don't know what his current poll numbers are, but at least for the years leading up to October 7th, he was one of the least popular. He was under criminal investigation, which had never happened before, a sitting Israeli prime minister being under criminal investigation. He was charged with crimes. They wanted him gone really badly, and he was clinging for dear life to power. But his method is always to double down, to get more extreme, to invoke emergency powers. He dodged all sorts of court appearances and judges and stuff like that by just saying that there was a war. He had emergency meetings he had to do with the war. So he's been dancing around criminal conviction. If he ever loses power, it's a lot like Trump. He will probably go to jail. And then like the judges in his case, like just get killed in these mysterious accidents.
Yeah.
And so you have this audacity in Yiddish, it's called chutzpah. It is this idea of it's kind of like who dares wins, that motto, where it's like, if you're just more audacious than everyone else, they're always stuck catching up to you. They can never actually get you because you're always too extreme, and they're reacting to the previous thing still. They're not ready for what you're going to do next. And so his clip there really is sort of a coded way, like it's in a way it's blatant, but another way it's a coded way of confirming that it's like Israel is offering this non-Christian alternative for how to deal with the world, where you finally get rid of Christianity. Christianity can't help you anymore. We need outright aggression. We need to dominate and crush and oppress and control everything. And so on a psychological, sort of meta-psychological level of these giant organizations, people don't think about how massive America's military is, how many levels there are, how many departments there are, sub-levels and cells and groups and divisions and all this stuff. This ideology has to work its way through that system and kind of root out Christian ethics from it. And of course, there's tons of Catholics in there. There's tons of good meaning Christians. A lot of people in the U.S. military are extremely sincere about their Christian faith, and they want it to be a righteous and noble military, but they don't realize that it's the beast of Revelation, and they don't realize that it is hopeless to try to reform it. It will always become more evil. And so this Israeli methodology is now being embodied by Trump, and I think that's where you're going to see it getting. It's an internal transformation, and Trump is this symptom of it. And I wonder if he's gone and JD Vance comes in, if it wouldn't be just turbocharged.
Probably the same thing. They're both being set up. Let's watch the clip again. I think there's a lot.
Yes, I would like watching it again.
Well, history proves that, unfortunately, and unhappily, Jesus Christ has no advantage over Genghis Khan. Because if you are strong enough, ruthless enough, powerful enough, evil will overcome good. Aggression will overcome moderation. So you have no choice. If you look at the world as it is today, you have to be blind not to see that the democracies led by the United States have to reassert their will to defend themselves and to oppose their enemies in time while there's still time, before the jarring gong of danger wakes them up and wakes them up too late. This is where we are now.
He's a good salesman, like that urgency. We have to do it now. You have to have the will. You have to be blind. It's kind of like you're stupid, like you're blind. But if you look through a lot of the Old Testament, even the New Testament too, and some of the stuff about Josephus too, it's like the angels are fighting for Israel, or God is on your side. But this is kind of the abandonment of Christian principles. And just to add on to what you've been saying, a lot of the Israelis are infiltrating Christian churches right now, particularly evangelical churches, and they're watching them. They're literally like doing all kinds of operations. So these things are being morphed and changed. And you could actually make an argument that something similar happened 2,000 years ago. It's really the genesis, the beginning of Christianity, where Jews were, really following Paul around and trying to change doctrine, possibly, or very angry. And a lot of that stuff, even Saul to Paul to Stephen and all these stories, it's this worldview, like it's almost like 2 millennia passed and we're back at the start point. Like it's a flat circle of coming back around, like, wow. So we're still fighting, and we may not even be fighting a political war. It's a theological war. But I really think this one clip encapsulates.
Yeah, I mean,
so many
almost every sentence is loaded. Like the idea that Genghis Khan is what you want to be more like. And so, okay, he was a ruthless, raping, killing machine that nobody considers to be moral, but he's suggesting that he is the better model than Jesus. Then he talks about how aggression is better than moderation, how evil can overcome good if you're just powerful enough. Okay, so what you're supposed to take away is we should be scared of those evil people and not be like them, but we need to be strong enough to defend against it. But what he's really saying, especially to the war hawks in the Pentagon, is you need to be Genghis Khan. You need to be the one that is evil. Stop being Christian, start being evil. Evil will win. And so obviously, this is a call to radicalism, to extremism. And what I've talked to people who are veterans, when I had my TikTok account that was super popular and I had hundreds of thousands of followers, and I would get DMs and messages from people who were veterans, some of them were in special forces, they would all tell me the same things, which was, I didn't realize that I was part of the problem, that I was part of an empire that was evil. I thought we were defending democracies. I thought we were doing good things. And they really struggle with this guilt afterwards. And what you're seeing right now with Pete Hegseth and this sort of really bogus Christian nationalism that he's pushing is this really audacious, strange, and false satanic version of Christianity that is exactly in line with Constantine. Constantine, the supposed Christian who has this vision of the cross in the sky, and he converts to Christianity. The first thing he does after that is kill a rival general in the Roman army for a power grab, throws him in the river, dredges up his body, cuts his head off, and sends it to his enemies to send a message that, don't mess with me, I'm taking over the Roman Empire. This was the first Christian thing that Constantine did after he supposedly converted. And so there's this identity crisis. I have a chapter in my book, Riding the Beast, here that we're talking about called Arousing the Soul Search, because the imagery in Revelation is about sex. It's like the sexual union of the whore and the beast. And so I'll just read a part of this from my book. And So I say Judeo-Christianity is also a brittle lie, trying to merge two religions that fundamentally oppose each other. Judaism rejects the very core of Christianity, which is the belief that Jesus is the Messiah they were waiting for. Obviously, this makes for an awkward alliance. This awkwardness is compounded by internal hypocrisy on both sides. Israeli Zionist leadership rejects the core doctrines of its own Judaism, which has always taught that the virtue of minding their own business, appeasing greater powers, and patiently waiting for their Messiah. While at the same time, America's leadership rejects the core doctrines of Christianity, such as forgiveness, relinquishing worldly power, and caring for the poor. They not only lie to others, but to their own selves. All of this creates cognitive dissonance. That is, a sense of insecurity and defensiveness around a subject that a person doesn't want to acknowledge. Both want to escape the anguish, and both need each other as an outlet. They relieve each other like a dark sexual tension that is built up and demands gratification. The irony is that the image of the beast has unparalleled control over the world, but it's trapped by the fraudulence of its own fake identity. Israel is the only nation that can liberate America, not in the military crusades, but in terms of relinquishing the lie, which is just exactly what you showed in that clip. It's such a fantastic clip. It must feel liberating to have a partner in the world who will unquestioningly support your war crimes, no matter how overt they are. Therefore, what Israel and America share, and this is the key thought here, what Israel and America share is not Judeo-Christianity in any sense, but rather a shared hatred of Judeo-Christianity. Israel exposes the false Christianity of America, and America exposes the false Judaism of Israel, and together they find the secret nature of their own true identities, a deep-seated hatred of God's laws. That is really where I think the psychology comes from at an institutional level, that they both know they could be so much more powerful if they just didn't hold back anymore by having to pretend they are these religious good guys in the world. And so there is this sort of subconscious desperation to shed their own religious guilt, because also a lot of people might not know this. I didn't really appreciate it before I started writing this book. The strongest opponents of Zionism are Jews. It is literally rabbis, not just random secular Jews, but rabbinic, traditional Orthodox Christianity opposes Zionism. And they are the ones who said, before Israel was even founded in the early 1900s, please do not make a Jewish state here. Please do not establish Jerusalem as being this like home of these refugees and then try to kick out the Palestinians. They predicted that there would be this ethno-supremacy, there would be this authoritarianism, that it would lead to cycles of violence that would never end. The rabbis are the ones who said all of this stuff first. When evangelical Christians were tricked in saying, we need to create the state of Israel, they have no homeland, where are they going to go after the Holocaust? It was the rabbis who said, do not force this into existence. And since then, they have continued to be one of the most vocal opponents. And so the religious Jews are actually aware of the hypocrisy and the evil of the Israeli Zionism, just like how pacifist Christians, the Quakers and the Mennonites and the Amish and the Baptists, who are not trapped in that sort of patriotic delusion of supporting big government and military adventures, they were the ones saying, don't go get involved in World War II. Don't drop bombs on other countries. Don't destroy everything. So both of them have this religious core that is trying to rescue their government from extremism, but those subversive satanic elements in both of them just resent that. They hate it. They are waiting and trying to find a way to plausibly kill off and discredit and get rid of that religious restraint so that they can become their true selves and flourish as this world empire that they desperately want. And that's why they make such a weird pairing. And I think the Bible symbolism is not just appropriate. This is why the history of the world, without even knowing it, can't help but fulfill what God foretold would happen.
It's interesting you say that, because another clip of Netanyahu comes to mind. They wear a patch of Greater Israel, some of the IDF people, so you can see that like it's not just an abstract idea. They're actually implementing it. They talk about it. The guy, his name is Naftali Bennett, who was a former prime minister, said, "Our next enemy is Turkey." Like, they're in a cataclysmic war with Iran right now, and they're still thinking about the next enemy. So you're right. There's something really different, and their stories about Israel was founded in 1948, but their stories about Jews living in Palestine in the 19th century, and they're like brethren with the Palestinians.
For
they're
sure,
Jewish,
yeah.
but like they would, like, their kids would be together. So there's not this whole antagonism escalated over time by what you said the Zionists are, which I don't even think is the right term. I don't think they're peaceful at all. But it's not really funny. But I got to find this clip. I mean, I want to find this clip of Netanyahu saying Israel will be a world power. And that was kind of their dream, is to have this power in Jerusalem and then rule over the nations. Like, they have this Genghis Khan level kind of dream where everybody will be their abject things. That, for people who don't know, Hitler, that was his dream, is all the lesser Untermenschen would worship at Berlin, and they would come in and they'd be ruled over by the Germans. It's almost, I don't even know if it's different than the Nazistic fever dream of Hitler. But theirs is there will be in Jerusalem, and then all the things. And there's some of these rabbis, I don't think it's all of them, but some of them believe in enslavement. Like, they believe that non-Jews should be their slave, like the Goyim type stuff. It's really ugly.
That's absolutely true. And right now, that is one of the reasons people are finding the clips, and they're seeing and they're exposing all of the extreme rhetoric within the Zionist Judaism, because there's a lot of factions within Judaism. And I talk about that in this book to a slight extent too, because I want to make those distinctions. So you have the Orthodox traditional Judaism that does not support Zionism. Then you have within that even these threads that are, okay, we shouldn't have political and military Zionism, but we should try to enslave and kill Christians. And like, we should, because they're considered to be idolaters, and they believe that Zion can only be established once you get rid of all the Christians. And this all ties back to like Daniel, because Daniel talks about how and just all of the Old Testament major prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, that, there will have to be a time when Zion, Mount Zion, where Jerusalem is the ruler of the world, that there will be a kingdom ruled by believing Jews who all the other nations of the world bow down to, and they acknowledge that they are superior, and they get rid of all their weapons. The whole world is disarmed. And so when you have this radical reinterpretation of that into military modern logic, you have that huge paradox unfold where they have to try to force those things to be true in a militaristic way. So it's like, okay, in what sense are all of these nations going to come and obey Israel and come and get their knowledge from them, like the Bible says? Well, it's going to be because you subverted their education systems, that you compromise their politicians, you blackmail them, and they have to come there to learn how to, run conspiracies, essentially. They're going to teach the world how to conspire. And ironically, although they think they're fulfilling Zionist prophecies from the Old Testament, they're doing exactly what the whore of Babylon in Revelation says, which is these transactional sexual favors, which is what prostitution is, on the spiritual level, where they're making alliances with all of these other nations. And then in return, they get all this money and aid. And that's where you have the merging of Israel and America's militaries and these budgets. They're going to basically, Israel, I don't know if Netanyahu himself has said it. I think he actually has. But he's talked about how he doesn't want any more aid money from America. He just wants to have basically direct from the source, just basically from the U.S. Treasury. They can just take whatever they want. It's no longer considered aid. It is just a partnership. They are basically one military. So when America creates its own budget for its military, it's also creating a budget for Israel's military. And there should be no more distinction between them. And I can't think of a better fulfillment of the Whore of Babylon than that, where they have this dysfunctional union. And I don't know if you found the clip yet, but I would love to see it if you have it.
I'm almost there. Let's see. And it's just interesting. You just see something about Netanyahu where he sees himself as a world leader. I mean, it's really incredible.
While you're looking for it, I'm going to read another. This is the beginning of chapter 6, which is called, I called A Vision of Greatness. And so it's this sort of preview of the Whore of Babylon being this ruler of the world. So it opens like this: God's promise to restore Jerusalem to greatness sits at the heart of Zionism. But before God performs this miracle, Satan will get his own chance to make it happen, creating a counterfeit Zion. This requires the beast. By using the full power of his conspiracy of nations, Satan seeks to create a version of the Holy Land where he rules, not God. This is how the Whore of Babylon is summoned into history. So, that's how I put it, is that Zionism has validity. The promises are real. But before Jesus comes back to establish it his way, Satan gets a chance to reign and rule and do it his way. And I don't believe Israel today currently fulfills the vision of Revelation 17, but you can see how it's building up to that and where it's going. And the study and what you're showing and what we're talking about, this all leads up to that. And so you can see the warning signs now.
Yeah. So this is right after the war started. I think the first shot was February 28th. So this is the war against Iran to establish Israel as this global superpower. This is what he states. And this may be AI. I'm not sure, but his hands make strange movements. But whoever's representing, it's a whole another show. But some of these videos were AI, in my opinion. But here we go.
We are in historic days, days that will be written in the annals of Israel. In Operation Roaring Lion, our roar is going and intensifying. We are pummeling the Islamic regime in Tehran. We are pummeling its emissaries, Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's unprecedented coordination between Israel and the U.S. and achieved.
There you go, unprecedented coordination.
Substantial achievements that are changing the reality in the West Bank, in the Middle East and beyond. These achievements are increasing the status of Israel as a superpower more than ever. Through our power in opposition to the power of our enemies, this is what is ensuring our survival. Our threats come and go, but when we become a regional superpower, and in many respects a global superpower, we have the power to push away threats and ensure our future. In 1993, I published an article in one of the newspapers in which I wrote, the biggest threat to the state of Israel is not in Arab states, but it is in Iran. Since then, for over 30 years, the murderous Ayatollah regime indeed has acted to attack the U.S. and the West. But first and foremost, it worked to implement its plan to destroy the state of Israel.
Yeah, he's been saying the same thing, but he does say things in Hebrew to his own people. He doesn't say in English to the rest of the world.
There's the famous clip of him talking to, I think it was after like 9/11 during the Iraq war or something, where he was talking about, he was just sitting in somebody's home. The video was never supposed to be leaked, but there's this woman who's asking him, like, what are you going to do if America, decides to not listen and they turn against us? Because they're also aware of the prophecy that the beast, that they're flirting with, can turn against them and destroy them. And they know that in the past, in ancient Israel, there was always this turbulent relationship with Rome and the Jews, and that they tend to get betrayed by the empire that they are sort of sucking up to. And Netanyahu says, don't worry about that. America is a very easy thing to manipulate, and he bragged about it in private there, and that video was not supposed to be released. And so he uses this sort of rhetoric in order to, it's alarmism, it's this false morality. But what he's really doing is setting up the conditions for the third temple, which is this huge capstone of achievement that not only is it required for the Christian Zionist British, like Francis Bacon, Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth sort of project of being in control of prophecy, and the Protestant Anglican kind of conspiracy to force Zionism into reality. But they need to destroy Iran in order so that they can build the third temple, because as long as Iranian missiles and drones have the ability to target Jerusalem and target the Temple Mount, they could never safely build the temple. And so that's what's really underneath all of this attack of Iran. That's why Israel has been pushing for war with Iran from the beginning and trying to drag America into there. And so he's talking about being a global superpower. One of the dimensions there's two things that really are important. One is the cyber security hacking component. Israel is basically number one in the world at cybersecurity, hacking, fingerprint duplication, so that it looks like an attack came from a different part of the world than it really did. There's all sorts of conspiracy theories and conspiracy research about different cyber attacks that have happened that people suspect Israel was behind, but they blame Iran. One of them just happened recently in Minnesota, I think it was. I don't know which state it was, but it was one of the Midwest sort of states where they had this water supply that was disrupted, this massive hit on their critical infrastructure, and they claimed it was Iran, and the White House came out and said it was Iran. But people think, somebody did research that just recently there was a contract for cybersecurity for that state run by an Israeli cybersecurity firm. And so they're like, oh, right when Israel gets in control of their cybersecurity, then Iran makes a cyber attack against them, which, reaffirms and remotivates America to attack Iran harder and not make a deal with them. I want to, if you don't mind, I'd like to respond to some of these comments that people are leaving.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go through the comments, guys. I just wanted to let Terry talk about the book, but let me go to the comments right now. Let's bring them up.
One of them I see
There's some
here,
questions too. Yeah, a lot of questions.
Somebody says, does he cover Noahide laws in this book? And I do. I have a section on the Noahide laws, which are this false concept introduced in the Middle Ages by, I think it wasn't introduced by Maimonides, but he's the one who kind of solidified it as this doctrine in Judaism, where they teach that there are these 7 laws that God supposedly gave to Noah and all of his children. And therefore, since they repopulated the whole world after the flood, they are binding on all nations forever as this sort of covenant that they have to follow. These 7 laws, they sound good on paper. It's like, don't blaspheme, don't murder.
No idolatry, no blasphemy,
kind of like
no
the 10
murder,
Commandments.
no sexual immorality, no theft, no eating limb from a live animal, and establishment of courts.
Yeah. So, that doesn't sound so bad. Who could complain about that? Except each of those are just a header. And underneath those, you actually have this much more intricate biased discussion of what that entails. And especially with idolatry, they categorize Christianity as idolatry because they say you're worshiping a man, you're not worshiping God, and so you're an idolater. And the punishment in the Noahide laws is beheading. And so in theory, everybody, and I have quotes from Israeli founding fathers from this modern state of Israel who say that even if you saw, at the time Barack Obama was the president, he said even if you saw Barack Obama in the streets, if he disobeyed the Noahide laws, you'd have to kill him. That there's no exception. If you're a Gentile, I guess he doesn't realize that, Obama is not a Christian, but he believes, and they teach anyway, that the Noahide laws, they should be establishing courts. There are movements, very real movements, to establish a court system wherein this rabbinic council can rule on religious matters and that they will have the legal authority to execute people that they consider to be idolaters. And so that's a very real movement. I talk about it in the book. Right now, it doesn't have any standing or recognition, but if this Whore of Babylon prophecy comes true, which I believe it has to, and if they get to the point of having that empire, the world power that Netanyahu is fantasizing about, it's very possible that Noahide laws could actually become the law of the land in various countries, in Israel or even in America. We know that in America, which is supposedly this free speech haven, that capitalism and money rules everything, and whatever money decides, the free market decides everything. They have these anti-BDS laws, boycott, divestment, and sanction laws, where you're not allowed to boycott Israel. So there's one country in the entire world that you are not allowed to boycott. And so they are carving out and making exceptions in the American system for Israel, where the normal rights and privileges of America doesn't exist. And so is it a leap to say that the Noahide laws could actually be next, that they would try to make it so that, okay, we're going to start to have tribunals like an Inquisition where rabbis could rule over matters of religion? And in the book, I actually go as far as to say Jesus, when he was describing the days before his return, says that they are going to take Christians and throw them into prison and to synagogues. He lists synagogues specifically as one of the institutions where Christians are going to be imprisoned in, and that they're going to put a bunch of Christians to death. And then later in Revelation, I think it's Revelation 19, or don't quote me on that, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there, you have the setting up of Jesus' kingdom on earth, and it says that all of those who were beheaded for the testimony of Jesus will be given thrones there. And so there's a specific mention of beheading as a class of Christian that is going to get rewarded. And it's possible, and this is all a hypothesis, but it's possible that the Noahide laws are going to become so prevalent that there will be hundreds of thousands of Christians who get beheaded, and then when Jesus comes back, they get the reward that he was talking about. So I absolutely do talk about it there. And somebody asked, if I can just quickly add also, somebody asked if I had received blowback from writing about this. You know what's ironic? All of the blowback I've gotten for writing this book has been from people who say I am too lenient towards Jews, that I should condemn them completely. I should not mention that Jesus has a plan to save them and to restore them after the Whore of Babylon is destroyed, that there are these promises that Israel will eventually be redeemed. Israel is so unpopular right now that, and there's so much genuine anti-Semitism on the rise that people are attacking me for recognizing that the Bible actually supports the idea that there will be a remnant of Jews who are saved in the end. I was not expecting that.
Right. BTEWB says, how do you guys reconcile the fact that all Abrahamic religions are one big, huge cope that keeps you in the sleep? I don't even know if that's worth responding. I don't think it's a huge cope, guys. It's doctrines, and if you believe that Christ is divine, it's not a cope. It doesn't.
I would
make you
love to.
slave.
I would love to discuss the logic that this religion keeps me in a slave class, as if I suddenly became an atheist, I would be rich and in charge of the world, and I wouldn't have to get a job. I don't. It's such a bizarre
I don't get that.
stretch of the
People have
imagination.
these weird acts to grind. Whenever you bring up Christianity or the Bible, you get these people in the comments. Scott says hi, greetings from South Carolina. Hi, Scott, welcome. Erasily, permanently, corrupt biblically. Oh, this is him again. I thought you were a smart lawyer. You bought it. Bought what? I don't know what you bought. I didn't pay for anything. I actually read the Bible free. Somebody gave me a free Bible. I actually read it, and it really changed.
Free online too, if you want it.
Changed my life for the better. Yeah, I like having it in my hand, and I'm glad I read it. I've read it twice too. For people who don't know. So. Let's see, 3 Abrahamic faiths are a triangulated system of control. It can be, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that much political control. Cultural and spiritual for sure, but I mean, I don't know. I'm not really one of those. What do they not NAR? What's the one where you like try to take over the government with this? Maybe it is NAR with the 7 things where it's like, what's the term, Terry? Where you like use your Christianity and take over the government?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure. There is a movement though, a new something revival that is.
The New Apostolic Reformation does that with the 7 holy hills and stuff. I don't know, guys.
Yeah, there's a lot of Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism is a good number.
Yeah.
Sold to you suffering for nothing. OP to the mass. Okay, so there's a lot of anti-biblical stuff. I don't believe in the term. If you want to put me to the test, I don't believe in the term of Judeo-Christian at all.
Right. And so this, you can tell when a person hasn't actually read the teachings of Jesus, and they're sort of imagining what he must have taught, and then they start talking about how it's slavery and it's disempowering and all this stuff, and it's such a beautiful self-examination that it calls for, that you have to examine yourself and forgive others. And it's not part of this book, but as part of some of my other books, I've looked into the New Age movement. This definitely touches on it, because that's where I think this is leading, the age of Aquarius and the rise of this new world religion that is going to come up that is very pagan. And pagans love the idea of manifesting and empowerment, and that you can gain power by rejecting Christianity and claiming what is yours and stuff. And so it is this striving for power that drives a lot of the hatred towards Christianity, whereas Christianity is, honestly, if you look at it biblically, it's pretty fatalistic. It's saying that the world will end a certain way. We have a role to play in the meantime, and we can't change the outcome of the world. We can only change the outcome of our own life. And we can do our part to try to wake people up. But a lot of people despise the fact that there is a certain fatalism within the Bible. And I can appreciate why, because if I wasn't a Christian, I would hate it too. It's sort of, that's the cope. The cope is the thought that you could change the world if there just wasn't this religion that told you to examine yourself and to forgive other people. And it's very sad that people have this false hope in political solutions and revolutionary solutions, and something is going to change. It's sort of actually, if you don't mind, I'll tie it right back into my analysis of the beast, because the nature of Rome was always from the beginning this idea that they need to save the republic, and that they acknowledge that there's a problem, and they acknowledge that there's a crisis of corruption in Rome. There's, right back from the Roman Republic days, the Senate was corrupt. And there was always this continuous movement to have good guys come in and save it and make it more powerful and get rid of these negative influences. And so it is this sort of trick that Rome keeps doing, and the Catholic Church kept doing. It's a continuation of the Roman mythology, Roman method there. And America does the same thing, where you just need another election. You just need another reform. We just need to vote harder and get organized, and we can change this, and we can get rid of the Epstein class, and we can do everything. But it's not true, man. It's a false hope. This is a fundamentally evil thing. Jesus taught you to not have worldly loyalties and worldly attachments, and to do your part as a servant of this invisible kingdom that you serve. And then the next life is where everyone gets justice, but people don't want to hear that. What is this comment? Have you heard of the passages of the pyramid text from the tomb of King Unas referred to as the cannibal hymn? No, that sounds like...
I do have a video that kind of ties into Terry's theme of Babylon, because that's what Epstein was actually building. And the concept of slaves and stuff was very prevalent in Epstein and his concepts. And that so-called temple that was on Little St. James is a replica of a slave community. He thought of himself as the Sultan. And it really dark, but kind of ties in. I mean, if you accept this like I do, hyper corrupt class of very dark actors trafficking people.
So like an Ottoman Empire sort of Sultan harem.
Exactly. He said a harem too. I think you'll find this clip. I'll play it in a sec after we go through the comments. I think you'll find it really interesting because it's very dark. Think from a guy who was remember the Talmud came out of Babylon. It's called the Babylonian Talmud for a reason. And he was talking about Babylon. And there's always that tension between the true Jerusalem and Babylon, or Jerusalem and Babylon in the Bible. Let's see. Okay. TT makes sense. What's the implication that you must also be ruthless, nonsensical framing of literature? Yes. Diminish the authority of Christ. I think you're right. Black Invalid. Great work on Manchurian Candidate. Thank you. Anybody can watch that 16-part series. Yeah. Erickson and Estabrook's are the key of American mind control. And almost nobody knows about that. So that's
never heard of them. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, you should check it out because they go back pre-war too, and a lot of books and a lot of writing, and ties into J. Edgar Hoover of all people. Blue Girl, I think you answered this question, Terry. Does he cover no-head lies? The answer, no-head laws. Excuse me. Yes, he did. As in the blowback, you answered that question. That's TT. TT makes sense. What does Mr. Wolfe expect the remainder of Trump's term to look like in relation to Israel, and what may occur during the next election in the same regard? Would you like to answer that?
You know what's funny is I did articles on my Substack. If people don't know my Substack, it's winterchristian.substack.com. I did articles tracking Trump against Netanyahu and how much those two hate each other. There is a famous story of after the 2020 election, Netanyahu immediately congratulated Joe Biden on his win and did not play at all into Trump's narrative that the election was stolen. And Trump went to media and said, F Netanyahu, he's going to regret this. And, they have this dysfunctional history. It's not like people think where Netanyahu and Trump are secretly best friends and they pretend to sometimes disagree. These two hate each other. And despite that, they are compelled, which I try to lay out in the psychology of this, that they are both driven by these forces behind them that will not allow them to compromise, and they both need to escalate with each other. Netanyahu gives them the golden pager, which is this implied threat of murdering Trump, this exploding pagers that Israel put into everything. And so obviously Trump is, now we know from the Epstein files, he's completely blackmailed from head to toe, and he's this utterly helpless tool in a way, but he still has this intense pride and he doesn't want to be controlled. And so I think the rest of Trump's term is going to be exactly what we've been seeing since I started writing this book. I started writing this in like October, something like that. And then like in January, February, you have this war with Iran that suddenly breaks out. And then now we have legislation coming in that Israel and America are supposed to merge their militaries. That's the preview of where this is going. And I'll say probably no one's going to mention this, but every time Israel mentions the existence, the right to exist, what they're slyly referring to is known as the Samson option, which I talk about in the book, which is Israel's secret nuclear weapon stockpile that they have said in private, although it's not a public policy because they don't admit that they have nuclear weapons, that if Israel were ever to cease to exist, if its existence was ever threatened, the policy is like Samson in the temple, where all of his captors and enemies are behind him, and he's chained up to these pillars in front of the temple, and his eyes have been gouged out, and he's about to be sentenced to death. He tears down those two pillars with his inhuman strength, and he crushes himself and everyone else and takes the entire temple down at once. And that's how he kills all of these evil rulers. And that's a real biblical story. And the Samson option is the same thing at a nuclear level, that if Israel's going to get destroyed, they will destroy the entire rest of the world along with them. And so there is this threat that when they say, do you believe Israel has the right to exist? They're essentially making a list of people that, or nations, I should say, that they will target if they do not support Israel's, quote, existence. And so it's, again, a type of blackmail. It's a nuclear blackmail. And so I don't think there is any way for America to abandon Israel at this point. They can only make deeper inroads, and you're going to see this dysfunctional, it's going to turn against Christians ultimately. I don't know if it's going to happen in Trump's term as in office. I kind of think Trump is going to get removed and JD Vance is going to get in there. But I foresee basically the tribulation is going to start happening. You're going to get a lot of false flag operations. They're going to have to make Christianity seem like it's the root cause of all this problem. And then they're going to start kickstarting the tribulation engine because, like I said, they desperately want to shed Christianity so that they can have this sort of rebirth of America as this true superpower. He says, considering the level of connections Israel has in many countries, including competing superpowers like Russia and China, how much geopolitical dialects does Mr. Wolfe think that may we be experiencing? If by dialects you mean like the Hegelian dialectic, where they use both sides against the middle, I definitely think multipolarism and this idea of the East competing with the West is false. That there is fundamentally, you have the Eastern and Western halves of the Roman Empire. That is also something that has continued with the beast. The beast continues to evolve. Right from the beginning, there was an Eastern and Western Roman Republic. There was always this acknowledgement. One spoke Greek, one spoke Latin. Then with Constantine, he officially establishes New Rome in Constantinople in Turkey, and that becomes the home of New Rome. The Western Roman Empire falls. The Eastern Empire is still there. And then that transforms basically into the Catholic Church in the West and the Orthodox Church in the East. And then again, with modern nations and republics, yes, the Byzantium Empire is what it's now called, but it was just called the Roman Empire. It's a modern thing to call it Byzantium. They just thought of themselves as Roman because they had never stopped being Roman. And in the modern republic sense, Russia is the one that took over the Byzantium Empire. The Russian oligarchs and the Russian founders of Russia literally said that they are a continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire. That's why they are called the Romanovs. That's why they have all this. They have deep connections to the Eastern Roman Empire. And so it is sort of the strange thing is, honestly, the Eastern and Western halves of the Roman Empire genuinely do have tension with each other. They genuinely, they're not just pretending to hate each other. The Pope hated the patriarchs, and the Crusades did swoop into Constantinople and destroy and kill everybody in Constantinople during the Crusades. They genuinely do hate each other, and yet they are part of the same beast system. And so it is this dysfunctional tension within itself that the Bible perfectly predicts. And so I think that's just going to have to continue. There's always going to be an Eastern and Western Roman Empire in some sense.
Alex Iphigenia asked, didn't the Bible come from a publishing company? Do you want to answer that?
That is such, if that's a sincere question, that is such a silly question. Each book of the Bible was written separately by a different author, except for those that happen to be written by multiple, like Paul writes multiple or whatever. But these are all ancient texts that are separately transcribed and reproduced over time, and then eventually they start to get collected into canons and collections, and then those get translated, and then this is all, thousands of years before what we would consider to be a publishing company. So
yeah,
absolutely not.
The canon that we have now, generally, the general rule is that people had first-person accounts of the events of what happened, whether it's one of the apostles or somebody there, somebody who knew somebody. That's generally it. So, and then there's apocryphal stuff, and so there's a lot of things that some people argue should be in the Bible that aren't. But
sure, it's an open question. What should all be in the Bible? But I
don't know
if the question is just the Bible itself. Yeah.
Glimmerman, would Christ want us to harness rebellion against Noahide laws? And Noahide is Noahide. So, although I like the way you spelled it, like Jekyll and Hyde, though.
In my opinion, harnessing rebellion is a foolish thing to try to do within the beast system. I don't know what you'd be trying to accomplish there. The real rebellion you can do as a Christian is exactly what we're doing right now, and I very much appreciate William for doing it, which is to expose the lies. And that is spiritual warfare. When you analyze, you break down their arguments, you expose it for being false. That's the real rebellion. If you want to try to, what are you going to do? Get a bunch of guns and go shoot up synagogues or something? Like, that kind of stuff is insane. It only creates backlash, and it justifies further crackdowns and further. They're waiting for that kind of thing. That's why they have the surveillance state set up. They have everything set up for if there ever is a mass rebellion. And so you should be following the example of Jesus, who was the ultimate rebel, didn't hurt anyone, didn't kill anyone, and he overturned the world with being a martyr and being an example of how to peacefully challenge authority and to enrage them with the truth.
TT, where can you find? There's actually a book called The Samson Option. Like, literally, you can look it up on Amazon. I think it was a famous journalist wrote about it because they put it together like it's real.
Yeah, I have citations in my book of the actual journalists who talk about it. There's a famous report about Golda Meir, I believe her name was, this female Israeli prime minister who, when the Egyptians were attacking Israel, she was in her war chamber with her counselors, and somebody came in and said, Zion is falling, or something like that, this coded language for the Egyptians taking over. And this guy feared, this captain or whatever in the military, believed that Jerusalem was going to be overridden and Israel would be conquered by Egypt. And so he said, should we use the Samson option? Is now the time to launch our nuclear missiles? And she apparently shrugged it off basically and said, that's the last thing we need right now, and sort of kicked him out. But they were preparing during this conflict to do it. And there's been other times where I believe a message was sent to Kissinger at a certain point saying that they feared for their existence at some point. And I think it was, must have been Nixon, I think, sent the biggest payload of weapons and arms and anything that had ever been transported in history directly to Israel from America. They flew in this unbelievable amount of arsenals and weaponry, and it is understood that when Israel was saying our existence is in danger, that's a coded threat saying, hey guys, we are about to start launching nuclear missiles if you don't come and save us. And so there's these different accounts from people who were involved. It's not some random conspiracy theory. It's a matter of scholarly record. You can look it up.
Thanks for all the great questions. We are at the 80-minute mark. Got about 10 minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything I missed before we wrap it up, guys? Terry. Sorry.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say, looking forward from where we are, there's a question of what it might look like going forward, and I want to try to caution people about a couple of things. One is don't fall for anti-Semitism and outright sort of like blanket generalizations about Jews, because again, like I said, huge protests against Netanyahu from Jews, from secular Jews and rabbinic Jews and whatever, realize that this is a complex thing. Their system is a lot like our system. We have corrupt leaders. The average people don't like it. Some people believe it's necessary. It's a necessary evil, whatever. If you're just going to spout literal neo-Nazism or whatever, I see a lot of that online, especially with young people. And that's a trap that you'd be falling into. Even from a Christian perspective, you have to realize that there are prophecies where after there's a tribulation, unfortunately, that has to happen. Jesus said it has to happen, where Christianity gets persecuted and imprisoned and questioned and killed. Then there's going to have to be a time when the Antichrist comes, the third temple is created. That's an unavoidable thing, which in a way you'd say, oh, that endorses the idea of Zionism. They need to create a third temple. So destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, start the Holy War, build the third temple. That's what God wants us to do, right? No, that's also something I cover in the book, is just because Zionism, or at least the modern take on Zionism, is in a way fulfilling prophecy, that doesn't justify the morality of what they're doing, it, how they're doing it. It is still fulfilling prophecy. It's just fulfilling the prophecies about how this evil conspiracy is going to happen, that Satan is going to be allowed to control the world and kill Christianity. And so there's a reason why people have difficulty with some of my books, because I don't turn a blind eye to that the fact that this ends in a tragedy before Jesus comes back. It has to get very bad before there is a millennial kingdom and Jesus comes in, destroys the Whore of Babylon, destroys the man of sin, the Antichrist, destroys the third temple with the abomination of desolation. And then you can finally have the resurrection. Then you have this remnant of Jews that is given new life, new bodies, and they reign with Christ, and there is this new kingdom. And so if you believe that any of these prophecies are true, that we are seeing the fulfillment of the Whore of Babylon, you should then go one step further logically and say, well, in that case, then all the subsequent prophecies are also true. There needs to be a third temple. There needs to be a man of sin who can sit in that third temple. There needs to be a tribulation. It needs to get bad enough that a bunch of Christians get killed. I think personally, all Bible-believing Christians get killed in the tribulation, and maybe there's a false church that survives, but the real Christians are dead. And then the good promises can come true that Jesus does come back. And this is, I think, going to actually be a wedge issue going forward, that they're going to start using Christian eschatology against us. It might even be part of what triggers the tribulation, is this idea that, and I cover this in the book, this New Age belief that when you believe something and you teach it and a bunch of people focus their attention on something, you are manifesting that thing, right? That's a New Age belief. And so there's this belief that if Christianity teaches prophecy and teaches that it's an inevitable thing and it involves evil stuff, then we are manifesting that evil into existence. And because we manifest it, we are guilty of it and we are to blame for it. And so the very teaching of the Bible, I joke in the book that my book might be used as evidence against me that I am helping to manifest the satanic takeover of the world. And I just have to accept that, because I'm not going to betray my beliefs in the Bible. But I could foresee that literally the Christian teachings about prophecy in the end times will be used against us to justify a tribulation, ironically. And I just say, I'm not afraid of anything that this world can throw at me. I'm not afraid of death, torture, imprisonment, starvation, whatever it is. I believe that my soul is secure with God. And so that doesn't intimidate me. They can't silence me with that kind of stuff. And I'm just going to try to spread it even more, because I'm not afraid of it. Now, in the meantime, if you can do something on a local level to improve your community or help your family or whatever, obviously that'd be great. Try to do that. But this big picture doesn't change when you get involved with activism and try to, change the nature of the beast. It doesn't work.
Amen. And the book is now available on Amazon. It's Kindle, hardcover, paperback, so you can get it in those 3 formats if you want. And then your Substack is Winter Christian, right?
Yes, winterchristian.substack.com. I do what I consider to be thought experiments and end times ministry is what I call it, to try to basically help people get ready for end times. And instead of creating panic and fear and discouragement and sort of, oh, woe is us, what is going to happen? It's more like, if this is going to happen, let's go all the way. Let's never stop. Right, even as the tribulation is happening, let's just double down and preach harder and be more encouraging and more optimistic about the truth, which is that we have the truth. We are on the winning side. Satan never wins. Even if we die, we just get blessings in the next life. And so ultimately it's a message of encouragement, but from a worldly perspective, I can understand why people are afraid of it. But that's the paradox that has always existed for Christianity.
Gotcha. I'm going to finish off with this video of Rena O, known victim, new Virginia Giuffre. But there's a lot here to unpack. But this is the Epstein network that is still in power, that Trump is a part of, so is Kushner. And this is their mentality. And a lot of people share this mentality. So I'm going to play this because it's important.
To read. And he immediately began brainwashing me, and he knew with me, the whole massage thing, give me a massage for $200 thing, would not have worked. I would have walked out of there. He used a different method to manipulate me. He knew that wouldn't have worked on me. So he used art, but I still ended up in that room. And things still happened to me against my will in that room. And there were a lot of other people who I just at this point call them co-conspirators who abused me along with him. He wasn't the only one in that room. A lot of strangers would just show up. I don't want to go into the details because I'll disassociate and I want to stay in the present. So I don't like talking about the details. By giving me books to read, he indoctrined his ideology, and his ideology was a polygamous empire that he told me he was planning on building. It's, in the beginning, I read the books. I thought it was just an idea. I was studying history books. He kept talking about it, and most of our conversations revolved around this harem. And I know, in other countries, they call it the harem, but here in America, he called it harem. That's why I pronounce it that way. He told me I was going to be a favorite, and I was going to be part of Babylon. So now referring back to the religious artwork that I made, and him telling me I was going to be a part of Babylon, at that age, I had no idea that Babylon is the most grotesque, disgusting, unholy place that is mentioned in scripture in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I sincerely believe that this is what Jeffrey Epstein was truly doing here on this planet. He was building or rebuilding Babylon. He was bringing back hell on earth. Because if you read the Bible, the children of God, they're looking to build heaven on earth, a peaceful place. And he was looking to build the opposite of that. And he told me I was going to be a part of it. And then as he handed me the books, from that day going forward, he constantly talked about me having this baby with the Sultan. And he was the Sultan, obviously, in this Babylon world that he built for himself.
Just hearing.
Very dark stuff, guys. Literally building hell in Babylon. That's what they're thinking about. So it's something to be aware of. And this was somebody who knew Jeff Epstein firsthand, and the network is still in power, and it still has all that information. But again, Terry, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for all the comments. We had 170 live listeners. Thanks everybody for taking part. Go get the book. Full title again is Riding the Beast: Israel and America's Partnership in Prophecy. And the author again is Terry Wolfe, Wolfe. Terry, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Stay there.